What would you do if the daughter of a paramedic knew more about saving lives than the hospital's board-certified specialists? Emma Rodriguez had spent her entire 16 years absorbing medical knowledge from her father, Luis, learning emergency procedures that weren't taught in medical schools. When St. Catherine's Hospital faced its worst crisis in decades, Emma's unconventional education would prove more valuable than any degree hanging on the CEO's office wall. Before we get to this wonderful story, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the story. Emma had been 8 years old when she first climbed into the back of her father's ambulance, wide-eyed and curious about the equipment that seemed to save lives every day. Luis Rodriguez had tried to discourage her interest at first, explaining that emergency medicine was no place for a child. But Emma's questions had been too intelligent, her observations too insightful to ignore. "Mija, why do you want to know about medical equipment?" Luis had asked during one of their conversations in the garage where he maintained the ambulance after hours. "Because you help people," Emma had answered simply. "And I want to help people too." That innocent statement had begun an 8-year informal medical education, unlike anything taught in traditional schools. Luis, a veteran paramedic with 15 years of experience, had gradually begun explaining procedures, letting Emma observe equipment maintenance, and teaching her to read the subtle signs that separated life-threatening emergencies from routine calls. By age 12, Emma could interpret basic EKG rhythms. By 14, she understood medication dosages and drug interactions better than many nursing students. By 16, she had observed more emergency medical situations than some residents in their final year of training. But her education came with a price: the constant knowledge that in Miami's working-class neighborhoods, medical emergencies were often matters of life and death decided in minutes rather than hours. St. Catherine's Hospital represented everything the Rodriguez family couldn't afford. Located in Coral Gables, its gleaming towers served Miami's wealthy elite with private suites, world-renowned specialists, and medical technology that cost more than Luis earned in a year. Emma had only been inside the building a handful of times, usually when her father was transporting patients to their emergency department. Dr. Patricia Mansfield, the hospital's CEO, embodied the institution's exclusivity. A Harvard-educated physician turned administrator, she had built St. Catherine's reputation by catering to celebrities, politicians, and international business people who demanded the finest medical care money could buy. Her corner office overlooked Biscayne Bay, its walls decorated with awards recognizing the hospital's excellence in serving South Florida's most privileged patients. The crisis began on a steamy Tuesday morning in August when Emma accompanied her father to the hospital for what should have been a routine patient transfer. Luis had been called to transport Mrs. Catherine Westbrook, an 82-year-old philanthropist who'd been receiving treatment for what her private physicians described as minor cardiac irregularities. "Stay in the ambulance," Luis instructed Emma as they pulled up to St. Catherine's 5IP entrance. "This is a high-profile patient, and hospital administration doesn't like family members in treatment areas." Emma nodded, accustomed to waiting during her father's calls. But as Luis and his partner wheeled Mrs. Westbrook into the building, Emma noticed something that made her stomach clench with worry. The elderly woman's skin had a grayish pallor that Emma recognized from her father's emergency calls, the color that indicated serious cardiovascular distress, not the minor irregularities described in her chart. Minutes stretched into an hour as Emma waited in the ambulance, her concern growing with each passing moment. Finally, her curiosity and medical instincts overcame her obedience. She slipped out of the vehicle and made her way into the hospital through a side entrance she'd observed during previous visits. The VIP floor of St. Catherine's Hospital was unlike anything Emma had experienced. Thick carpets muffled footsteps, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hallways lined with original artwork, and private suites resembled luxury hotel rooms more than medical facilities. Emma felt acutely aware of her simple clothes and working-class background as she searched for her father. She found chaos disguised as controlled medical activity. In the hallway outside Mrs. Westbrook's suite, a team of specialists huddled in urgent conversation, while nurses moved with the barely contained panic that Emma had learned to recognize as a sign of serious trouble. Her cardiac enzymes are elevated, but the EKG isn't showing classic infarction patterns, Dr. James Harrison, the attending cardiologist, was saying to his colleagues. We've run every standard protocol, but her condition continues to deteriorate. Dr. Sarah Kim, the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, shook her head in frustration. We've consulted cardiology, pulmonology, and neurology. Nothing explains this rapid decline. Her symptoms don't fit any standard diagnostic pattern. Emma positioned herself near a supply closet, close enough to overhear but trying to remain invisible. What she heard made her blood run cold. The doctors were describing symptoms that she had seen before, not in textbooks or medical journals, but in real-world emergency situations that her father had taught her to recognize. "Excuse me," a sharp voice said behind her. Emma turned to see Dr. Patricia Mansfield approaching, her expression a mixture of irritation and disdain. "You're not authorized to be on this floor. Are you related to a patient?" "My father is Luis Rodriguez, the paramedic who transported Mrs. Westbrook," Emma replied respectfully. "I was looking for him." Dr. Mansfield's expression hardened. "Your father is handling discharge paperwork. You need to return to the ambulance immediately. This is a restricted medical area, not a place for—" She paused, her eyes taking in Emma's appearance, family members to wander around. The unspoken words hung in the air. "Not a place for people like you." Emma nodded and began to move toward the elevator, but as she passed Mrs. Westbrook's room, she caught a glimpse of the patient through the partially open door. What she saw made her stop despite Dr. Mansfield's dismissal. Mrs. Westbrook's positioning on the hospital bed was wrong. Her head was elevated at an angle that would worsen the symptoms Emma suspected she was experiencing. The cardiac monitor showed a rhythm that the medical team was interpreting as stable, but Emma could see subtle irregularities that suggested a condition her father had taught her to recognize in the field. "Dr. Mansfield," Emma said, turning back to the CEO, despite her obvious desire to have Emma removed. "I think Mrs. Westbrook might have posterior wall myocardial infarction with right ventricular involvement." The hallway fell silent. Dr. Harrison and Dr. Kim stopped their conversation to stare at the teenager who had just offered a sophisticated cardiac diagnosis. Dr. Mansfield's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Young lady, you are completely out of line," Dr. Mansfield said sharply. "We have some of the finest cardiologists in the country treating Mrs. Westbrook. Your father's work as a paramedic doesn't qualify you to diagnose anything." But Dr. Harrison had approached Emma, his expression curious rather than dismissive. "What makes you think it's posterior wall involvement?" he asked, his tone professional despite Emma's age. Emma glanced nervously at Dr. Mansfield, then back at the cardiologist. Her symptoms started gradually, rather than with acute chest pain, which is typical for posterior infarctions. The EKG probably shows reciprocal changes in the anterior leads rather than clear ST elevation, because posterior walls don't show up well on standard 12-lead readings. And her blood pressure is probably dropping despite medication because right ventricular involvement affects filling pressures. Dr. Kim moved closer, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest. "How do you know about posterior wall infarctions? That's not exactly common knowledge." "My father has transported dozens of cardiac patients over the years," Emma explained. "He taught me to recognize patterns that happen in the field before patients reach the hospital. Posterior MIs are easy to miss because they present differently than the classic cases in textbooks." Dr. Mansfield stepped between Emma and the medical team. "This is absolutely inappropriate. We don't take diagnostic advice from teenagers, regardless of their father's profession. Security—" "Wait," Dr. Harrison interrupted, his hand raised to stop Dr. Mansfield's call for security. He turned to Emma with professional intensity. "If you're right about posterior wall involvement, what would you recommend for diagnostic confirmation?" Emma took a deep breath, aware that she was about to challenge the medical expertise of doctors who had trained for decades. A posterior EKG with leads V7, V8, and V9 would show the ST elevation you're looking for, and an echocardiogram focused on the inferior and posterior walls would show wall motion abnormalities that confirm the diagnosis. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Harrison exchanged glances with Dr. Kim, both recognizing the sophistication of Emma's recommendations. "Those are very specific diagnostic protocols," Dr. Kim said slowly. Where exactly did you learn about posterior lead placement? My father bought used EKG equipment to practice on, Emma replied. He wanted to make sure he could recognize cardiac problems during transport. We practiced lid placement until I could do it faster than most of the ER techs. Dr. Mansfield's face had grown increasingly red during this exchange. I don't care what this child thinks she knows. We have protocols, credentials, and professional standards for a reason. Remove her from this floor immediately. But Dr. Harrison was already moving toward Mrs. Westbrook's room. Sarah, let's run the posterior EKG. It'll take 5 minutes to either confirm or rule out the diagnosis. 20 minutes later, the results were undeniable. The posterior EKG showed clear ST elevation in leads V8 and V9, while the echocardiogram revealed wall motion abnormalities exactly where Emma had predicted. Mrs. Westbrook was indeed suffering from a posterior wall myocardial infarction with right ventricular involvement, a diagnosis that required immediate intervention but had been missed by the hospital's cardiology team. This is extraordinary, Doctor, Harrison said, reviewing the diagnostic images. The presentation was so atypical that we were looking in completely the wrong direction. Dr. Kim nodded, her expression mixing admiration with professional embarrassment. If we hadn't caught this, Mrs. Westbrook could have gone into cardiogenic shock within hours. The posterior wall involvement explains why our standard treatments weren't working. Emma stood quietly in the hallway, watching as the medical team implemented the treatment protocols that her diagnosis had made possible. Mrs. Westbrook was rushed to the cardiac catheterization lab for emergency intervention, her condition finally understood and addressed appropriately. Dr. Mansfield remained silent throughout the medical emergency, her expressions cycling between embarrassment, anger, and something approaching disbelief. The teenager she had dismissed as unqualified had provided the diagnostic insight that had potentially saved a patient's life. As the immediate crisis subsided, Dr. Harrison approached Emma with newfound respect. I have to ask, how many similar cases have you observed with your father? Dozens, Emma replied honestly. Field medicine is different from hospital medicine. Paramedics have to make rapid diagnoses with limited equipment and no backup support. My father taught me to see patterns that emergency situations create. Dr. Kim joined the conversation, her professional curiosity fully engaged. Have you ever considered formal medical training? Your diagnostic instincts are remarkable. Emma's expression grew sad. Medical school costs more money than my family will ever have. My father works double shifts just to pay for our apartment. College is already going to be a stretch. The conversation was interrupted by Luis Rodriguez, who had finally completed his paperwork and was searching for his daughter. When he found Emma surrounded by St. Catherine's medical staff, his expression mixed pride with concern. Mija, what's going on? He asked, his English carrying the slight accent that marked him as first-generation American. Dr. Harrison stepped forward to explain. Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter just provided a diagnostic insight that potentially saved Mrs. Westbrook's life. Her understanding of cardiac emergencies is extraordinary. Luis looked at Emma with a mixture of pride and worry. He had always known his daughter was exceptional, but having her medical knowledge recognized by hospital specialists was both thrilling and terrifying. Dr. Mansfield, who had remained silent during these exchanges, finally spoke. Mr. Rodriguez, while we appreciate your daughter's contribution today, she cannot continue to access restricted areas of the hospital. Our protocols exist for important legal and safety reasons. Of course, Dr. Mansfield, Luis replied respectfully. Emma understands that she shouldn't have been on this floor. But Dr. Harrison wasn't finished. Dr. Mansfield, I'd like to discuss something with you privately. He turned to Emma and Luis. Could you wait in the family consultation room? I think there are some opportunities we should explore. An hour later, Emma found herself sitting in Dr. Mansfield's office, still struggling to believe what Dr. Harrison had proposed. The cardiac department wanted to offer her a part-time position as a diagnostic consultant, providing her with formal training while utilizing her unique field-based medical knowledge. This is highly irregular, Dr. Mansfield said, her tone making clear her continued skepticism. We don't typically hire 16-year-olds for medical positions, regardless of their apparent abilities. But we do hire people who can save lives, Dr. Harrison countered. Emma's diagnostic approach is different from traditional medical training, but it's incredibly effective. She sees patterns that we miss because our education focuses on textbook presentations rather than real-world variations. Dr. Kim nodded in agreement. Field medicine requires different skills than hospital medicine. Emma has learned to make rapid diagnoses with limited information, exactly what we need during emergency situations. Emma listened to the adults discuss her future with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. The opportunity to work at St. Catherine's Hospital would provide her with medical training she could never afford otherwise, but it would also place her in an environment where her background and age would constantly be questioned. "What about school?" Luis asked, his practical concerns overriding his excitement. "Emma needs to finish high school." "We can arrange her schedule around her education," Dr. Harrison assured him. She would work part-time, primarily observing and learning, while occasionally providing diagnostic input when requested. Dr. Mansfield's expression remained skeptical, but she had been outvoted by her medical staff. "If we proceed with this arrangement, there will be strict protocols. Emma will work under direct supervision, her activities will be limited to observation and consultation, and any diagnostic suggestions must be confirmed by attending physicians." Emma nodded eagerly, understanding that Dr. Mansfield was offering her a chance despite her obvious reservations. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez had become a legend among St. Catherine's medical staff. Her ability to recognize unusual presentations of common conditions had contributed to accurate diagnoses in 17 cases that had initially puzzled hospital specialists. But more importantly, her presence had begun to change how the hospital approached emergency medicine. "Emma has taught us to look beyond standard protocols," Dr. Kim explained to a visiting medical delegation. "Her field-based training helps us see patterns that traditional medical education sometimes overlooks." Emma's influence extended beyond diagnostic consultation. She had begun developing training programs that helped hospital staff understand how emergency conditions presented in real-world situations rather than textbook scenarios. Her insights into rapid diagnosis with limited resources had improved the hospital's emergency response times significantly. But perhaps the most significant change was in Dr. Mansfield herself. Watching Emma's contributions to patient care had forced the CEO to reconsider her assumptions about medical expertise and professional qualifications. "I was wrong about you, Doctor," Mansfield admitted during one of their regular meetings. "I let my prejudices about credentials and background blind me to your actual abilities." Emma appreciated the apology, but she had learned not to take the skepticism personally. "Medical knowledge comes from lots of different places," she replied diplomatically. "My father taught me that the most important thing is helping patients, not proving how smart you are." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency call. A multi-vehicle accident was bringing several trauma patients to St. Catherine's emergency department. Emma immediately rose to assist, her instincts honed by years of emergency medical experience. As she hurried toward the emergency department, Emma reflected on how much her life had changed. The working-class teenager who had once been dismissed as just a paramedic's kid was now an integral part of one of Miami's most prestigious medical teams. In the trauma bay, as Emma helped coordinate care for accident victims, she remembered her father's words from years earlier. "Mija, the most important medical equipment you have is your mind and your heart. Everything else is just tools." Luis Rodriguez watched his daughter work alongside some of the finest medical professionals in the country, his pride evident despite his concerns about her demanding schedule. Emma had not only proven that medical expertise could come from unexpected sources, but she had also created opportunities for other working-class students interested in healthcare careers. The Emma Rodriguez Scholarship Fund, established by grateful patients and their families, now provided financial support for students from similar backgrounds to pursue medical training. St. Catherine's Hospital had also implemented new policies that recognized field-based medical experience as valuable preparation for healthcare careers. Dr. Harrison, who had become Emma's primary mentor, often marveled at how much the hospital had learned from a teenager's unconventional medical education. "Emma didn't just save Mrs. Westbrook's life," he told colleagues. "She saved us from our own assumptions about where medical expertise comes from." As Emma completed her junior year of high school while maintaining her part-time hospital position, she had received acceptance letters from several prestigious universities offering full scholarships for pre-medical studies. But she had also been offered something equally valuable, the knowledge that her unique background and experiences were assets rather than obstacles in her medical career. The paramedic's daughter, who had once been told she didn't belong in elite medical circles, had proven that the most important medical qualification wasn't where you trained, but how well you could help save lives when it mattered most. Late at night, when St. Catherine's Hospital grew quiet, Emma would sometimes stand in the same hallway where Dr. Mansfield had first dismissed her as unqualified. The VIP floor remained elegant and exclusive, but it had also become a place where a working-class teenager's medical insights were valued as highly as any specialist's opinion. Emma's story had spread throughout Miami's medical community, inspiring other hospitals to reconsider how they identified and developed medical talent. Her success proved that extraordinary medical ability could emerge from unexpected backgrounds, and that sometimes the most valuable education came from years of watching a dedicated father save lives. One emergency call at a time. The girl who had learned medicine in the back of an ambulance had become living proof that genius, dedication, and the desire to help others were more important than credentials, wealth, or social status in determining who could excel in the healing arts. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.